There aren't many foods that get more disrespected than Spam and powdered eggs. But during World War II, Uncle Sam used this combination to start the day for thousands of soldiers fighting for American freedom who were bivouacked away from a mess hall. But who was Uncle Sam? I'll answer that question, feed the troops, and make a traditional camp breakfast recipe in this encore presentation of Making a Mess with the Yankee Camper. Spam and eggs.
This is the mise en place, or preparation, for your spam and eggs recipe for your mess kit. Now this meal consists of powdered eggs and spam, two staples that were available during World War II and helped keep the GIs nourished while they were advancing through Europe. The first part of this recipe is actually the spam. Now these are single serve packages of spam. It contains 2 pieces of spam in it, and this package is ready to go. The next part is the dehydrated egg crystals. These will make, in this recipe, 3 scrambled eggs. This contains 6 tablespoons of dehydrated egg granules. It also contains a half a teaspoon of butter granules, a teaspoon of minced onion. Onions were often carried when they were found by the GIs to give their meals some flavor. 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, a dash of pepper, and also vegetable oil. The vegetable oil goes into a separate Loctite bag or vial, and it should be marked vegetable oil for spam and eggs. Optionally, if you so desire, there are packets available of ketchup, and 1 or 2 of these may be what you want for your meal. Or you can also get some kind of hot sauce. This is a mild hot sauce, if you so desire to have that. You'll want to take a paper bag, mark it spam and eggs. We're going to start by putting in the spam, the egg mixture, and the vegetable shortening. Seal this bag, and you are ready to go with your in-the-field mess kit meal.
Camping and hiking is a recreational pastime that generations before our grandparents simply didn't have time for. Being outdoors was primarily for survival and work. If leisure time was spent outside, food would typically be prepared before leaving and brought in a hamper or basket. During the American Revolution, Continental soldiers were issued daily rations of beef, pork, or fish, as well as flour or cornmeal. Without refrigeration or a way to maintain storage, many times these foods were spoiled or infested with insects. Napoleon Bonaparte recognized that an army moves on its stomach, and, in 1795, he issued a prize for someone to create a method of storage for food to feed his troops. I cover this in depth in my camping gear video on can openers, which I will link at the end of this video. By 1806, the French Navy was using food that had been preserved in glass bottles, sealed to maintain freshness. During the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, the United States attempted to remain neutral, but Great Britain's interference with trade and especially forcing American sailors into the Royal Navy forced the U.S. into the War of 1812. It was during this time that a butcher turned meat inspector from Troy, New York, oversaw the shipping of foods to American soldiers and sailors. These provisions were placed in crates marked U.S. Knowing that Sam, the inspector, was from their area, the soldiers in the regiments from around Albany labeled these provisions as coming from Uncle Sam. Samuel Wilson was born just after the French and Indian War on September 13, 1766, in the town of Menotomy, now Arlington, Massachusetts. At the age of either 13 or 14, young Samuel joined the Continental Army as a messenger, and eventually he became a person overseeing the care of cattle, including the processing of the meat for provisions. Sometime in the 1780s, it's not clear if it was before or after the conclusion of the Revolutionary War, his family moved to Mise, New Hampshire. At the age of 22, he and his brother Ebenezer walked as pioneers some 125 miles west to the small village of Troy, New York, alongside the Hudson River. Here they established a business making bricks. By 1793, they had built a slaughterhouse to butcher and process meat. In the winter of 1797, Sam returned to Mason, New Hampshire to marry Betsy Mann, the daughter of Captain Benjamin Mann, who fought at Bunker Hill. They lived in Troy, in the part known as Mount Ida, where they had 4 children, 2 of whom died young. Also in the area lived many of the Wilson and Mann relatives, including a number of nieces, nephews, and neighbors' children, who called them Aunt Betsy and Uncle Sam. During the War of 1812, troops from the region gathered at the Greenbush cantonment just 10 miles south. The Secretary of War made a contract with Elbert Anderson, Jr. of New York City to supply and issue rations to the United States military stationed in New York and New Jersey. Anderson subcontracted Ebenezer and Samuel Wilson to supply pork and beef to the commissaries. Samuel was next appointed meat inspector, and among his responsibilities included verifying the freshness and packaging to ensure that the barrels were built and packed properly. These barrels were marked EA-US, indicating they were under contract from Elbert Anderson and belonging to the United States. Much of the meat from E&S Wilson was shipped to the camp at Greenbush, where the soldiers made an association between Uncle Sam Wilson and the U.S. stamp. As time went on, any military shipments marked U.S. were said to come from Uncle Sam. In 1854, at the age of 87, Sam passed away in his hometown of 65 years, where he's buried alongside his wife. In 1961, the United States Congress officially recognized that Samuel Wilson of Troy, New York, was the original Uncle Sam. Now you know.
I hope you're enjoying this video, and thank you for watching. I put these out so that I can share my experience camping and some of the great things about New England. I don't get any compensation for this. I do this for you. What you could do for me is you could buy me a cup of coffee. Doesn't need to be very much. Just a couple of dollars. Helps keep the channel running. Thank you for watching. Now, let's get back to the video. Well, good morning. This morning we're going to make a very quick breakfast of spam and eggs. And to start, we're going to take our spam and eggs kit and take out the shortening, spam, and the dehydrated eggs. Set our packaging aside. So the first thing that we'll need from our mess kit is our frying pan. And we'll use the small bowl pan as a mixing bowl. We're going to measure out 9 tablespoons of water. Into that water, we're going to put our mixture of dehydrated eggs and butter buds. We're going to stir those around, beating them until it gets completely covered. And then we'll let those sit aside and allow the butter granules in the eggs to absorb the water. Well, before we light the stove, let's put the vegetable shortening into the pan. We'll light the stove. This morning we're using the MSR Pocket Rocket. And set that to medium. And place the shortening right over the heat, allowing that shortening to melt. Then we're going to open our single serve packs of Spam. As you can see, that oil is completely melted. I'm just going to take it off the heat, set it on the pot holder while I finish opening up the Spam package. Now the Spam is essentially 2 slices of Spam. We're just going to add that right into the pan. Put that aside and add that pan back onto the heat to allow the Spam to begin to cook. It doesn't take very much to get that to cook. Using a spatula, we just want to keep it from sticking.
And while that Spam heats, let's talk about food preparation for the military after the War of 1812. At the start of the Civil War in 1861, food preparation hadn't changed very much since the American Revolution some 80 years before. Although ships in the Navy supplied cooks, the soldiers on land were expected to prepare their own foods based on rations. There were 2 types of rations issued during the Civil War: camp rations and marching rations, the latter being smaller and lighter. With the invention of the railroad, supply lines became more effective and could relocate more items faster, but the Army still relied on wagons for moving equipment, ammunition, and especially food, which required constant replenishment from the station to the camp. Supply lines were under constant threat of attack by the enemy. When traveling, soldiers would carry their rations in a haversack, sometimes several days' worth. When preparing meals, many times soldiers would get together to combine foods they had acquired through foraging, such as onions or other foods, and share spices. Eventually both sides determined having camp cooks made more sense. Some Southern officers even brought slaves to prepare meals, but the food hadn't changed very much. It was still salt beef or pork, hardtack, and dried vegetables such as beans, peas, sometimes rice, and perhaps coffee and sugar. Occasionally soft bread, flour, or cornmeal would be distributed in place of the hardtack. Once in a while, special treats and a different variety of foods would be provided by aid societies. By the time the U.S. entered World War I in 1917, supply lines had moved half a world away. The food, however, had changed very little. Canned meats may have been expanded to include corned beef, or as it's known in Britain, bully beef. Other items, such as potatoes, had been added, along with milk, butter, candy, and cigarettes. Camp kitchens were expanded, and field bakeries provided fresh bread, eliminating hardtack. Tinned rations were still issued as meals on the move, such as the emergency ration, which included meat and crackers. These were developed to protect food from exposure to poison gas and vermin. The Salvation Army's donut dollies provided coffee and fresh donuts to the troops. They were so popular with American soldiers, this may have led to the term doughboys. The officers in charge also began to understand that better food made a better performing army. During World War II, supply lines had to be able to support the U.S. Army on two fronts, both in Europe and the Pacific. Foods for the field were expanded to include sea rations, which were designed for combat troops and were packed in wooden crates, including a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, plus accessory packs with items like cigarettes, matches, and can openers. Sea rations were often criticized for being boring and unpalatable, but these kept soldiers fed, sometimes for weeks at a time. K rations were lighter than C rations and were issued for short duration missions. They were originally developed for airborne regiments and messengers. K rations were occasionally supplemented with rice, bread, or C rations. Powdered eggs, as we know them today, have been around since the early 1900s and were used in civilian camps as early as 1912. But they really came into their own during the shortage of fresh eggs during World War II. Spam, on the other hand, had been developed in 1937 during the Great Depression as a way to sell pork shoulder, which wasn't selling very well in the stores. During World War II, the commissary department included Spam as a tinned meat because it was easy to ship and store. I'll go into more details on Spam in a future video. After World War II, the military replaced C rations with MCIs, meaning Meals Combat Individual. However, the soldiers still referred to them as C-rats. These offered slightly more variety than was available during the Second World War and were used throughout all of the Vietnam era. Meals Ready to Eat, or MREs, were first issued during the 1980s and are still used for field rations by militaries today. These offer more variety and include a flameless heater. Note, selling government MREs is illegal. However, there are civilian versions available based on the military, but they can be expensive. Although Spam is no longer included as part of the menus for MREs, crystallized eggs are included in military group units. Now you know. Let's get back to making our breakfast at the campsite.
I'm going to slice this Spam in two. To allow it to cook up a little more evenly. We've done this earlier. Oh, look at that. What I've done is I have put a paper towel into my plate, and I'm just going to put this right onto the paper towel. Put that onto the paper towel as well. And now just going to add the egg mixture into the pan. And stir that, allowing the eggs to begin to form. Now you can see the eggs are starting to create little curds. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. And then I'm going to add the pepper. And then I'm going to add the salt. keep whisking them around, will they form into scrambled eggs. Well, it takes about 3 to 5 minutes for those eggs to cook up. I'll switch back to my spatula, making sure the eggs do not stick to the bottom of the pan. If they look like they're getting too brown, go ahead and turn that heat down. And you'll feel where the eggs are beginning to stick, adhere to the base of the pan. Just continually stir those eggs around as they form into scrambled eggs. I'm just going to use a fork to make sure that they get all mixed around. Those eggs are done. We're going to serve them up onto our plate like so. Spam and eggs. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video of making this meal that saved the world by feeding the GIs during World War II.
I hope you'll take a moment and hit the thumbs up. It just lets YouTube know that you enjoy the content I'm putting out. Also, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already. I try to put out a video every week on recipes like this, or the places I go camping, and the gear that I use. If you have anything you'd like to share, be sure to reach out in the comments section. I read every one and usually get back within a couple of days. In the meantime, I hope you'll get outside, and thank you for watching.